We're live.
Uh,
We're alive. What a time to be alive. I'm
Yeah.
wearing my Alexa socks,
No.
which is normally reserved for hackathons only. So today is a very special day. And usually I'm on the other side of this, at home watching and learning. So it's super cool to be here and be part of this really cool day. Give it up for the Alexa team, hardest working team in voice. Y'all snapping at home? Good.
Cool. Welcome everybody. This is Tailor your Alexa skill responses to deliver truly personal experiences. And we are very excited to be covering this with you. So this session is going to be focused a little bit more on the responses of Alexa. So this is in the design track. We're not going to be focused as much on the what users say to Alexa. That's the interaction model with intent, slots, and utterances. This is more the responses back of what you give Alexa to say to your customers. So my name is Eric Faisal. I am a senior solutions architect within our Alexa voice services group. I specifically work with device makers such as like Bose, Sonos, or Lenovo and their tablets to help integrate Alexa built in onto their products. But I've been working with skills for a little while as well. And my partner in crime here.
How you doing? I'm John G. I'm an Alexa champion, and I'm a voice skills producer. So I've been working in voice for a couple years now, and I am doing it full time. I've produced around 20 skills for myself under Bondad FM, and then more recently, I've been the voice producer in residence at the NFL, working with their digital innovation lab, looking at how voice is going to impact the fan experience for the league. And so that's how I met Eric. We worked on a project there together, and
I think that's my favorite skill that you worked on.
yeah, there was a lot to that one. It was cool. We pushed the limits.
That's right. Cool. So why would you want to deliver personal experiences? Well, human interaction is pretty much by definition personal. The way I would respond to my mother would be different to how I'd respond to, say, my best friend versus a complete stranger on the street. So conversing with Alexa should really be similar. Alexa, as you all know, is a few years old now. There are many skills out there, over 80,000 skills, and you really want to think about how you can make your skills stand out a little bit more, and personal experiences is a great way to do that.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Arthur, I love that.
Cheers.
Yeah, so I think our goal in designing and creating for voice is really to leverage the technology to create an experience that feels magical. And to do this, users really need to feel like they're speaking to someone or something that understands them and adapts to them. And this technology is still relatively new, and people in general are still finding their groove with it. And I think as developers, we have an opportunity to really shape how people experience voice. And it's our collective contributions that are going to continue to expand people's minds around what's possible with voice. And my background actually isn't in technology. It's in music and sound and video. So I was really drawn to voice in general through that lens of creativity. And I was fortunate to spend some time working at the Walt Disney Company, and reflecting back on that experience, one of the key takeaways for me was that Disney actually thinks of themselves as a technology company. It always has. It's in their DNA. And they invented the multiplane camera to bring Snow White to life, and the Imagineers they created the animatronics to bring the parks to life, and Pixar pioneered computer animation to bring Toy Story to life. So those are all like incredible technological innovations, but for most people, they don't think about that. They love Disney because of the story and the characters and the experiences of consuming those things. So I think it's through that lens that I got really excited about voice, and I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that we're on the cutting edge of this new paradigm of technology, but at the end of the day, it's all in service of the experience and the feeling of actually talking to these skills. It's about how that feels for the user. So I think it's a really cool moment in time for all of us in this space.
Yeah. So at Alexa, we're trying to do what we can to help bring some of that magic to customers, and you, as skill developers, are part of that experience. So, what creates a personal experience? Well, we like to think of some of these characteristics. So one, just you only answer a question once. You don't really need to repeat yourself. The person's probably listening to you, so you don't need to repeat it. Preferences should become default. So, for example, if my wife were to ask me, "Hey, Eric, what's the weather like?" I don't have to ask her, "Oh, what location and what date do you mean?" Well, we probably mean here, where we are at this moment. And Alexa can do the same. You'll notice if you ask her the weather, she's going to give you the weather information for your current location. And then context is kept throughout the session. If I was talking to my friend about my next vacation, we were talking about the beach and someplace warm, and then all of a sudden he switched up and started talking about skiing in the mountains, which is cool, but that's not really what we're talking about, so that's a little bit weird.
I think it's so important that language should feel natural. This is huge. You have to listen to the dialogue that you write, and ask yourself, does it feel good? And I think writing in isolation is very different from actually experiencing that. And so it's really important to spend time in the simulator and think about pacing and brevity and the flow of the words. And it's really important to even down to the syllable level. Like there's no such thing, in my opinion, as like SSML minutia. Like every little bit of markup can sort of tie a bow around the strings that you're writing. And we all know that there's some quirks and like unpredictability in how certain things are pronounced. Like actually for this, it's funny, like she'll say Alexa live. So, that's a really great example. I like to use a technique that I call like phonetic hacking. It's like not probably the proper way to do it, but like if you spell it Lyve, Alexa will say it as live. So, there's no right or wrong way to use those tools. I think the important thing is just to like really listen to the words and that's part of the craft of bringing these experiences to life.
Yeah. And then what John was talking about, the SSML, the speech synthesis markup language, is how you can program Alexa to say and pronounce different words and characters a little bit different way to emphasize the meaning properly.
Totally. And all the time I'm like punching up prosody on like single letters sometimes, just to like sort of just like get it in the pocket of feeling a little more natural. And I think the last thing is like users want to feel their experience is unique. If you were having a conversation with your friend and then you sort of realize that they just said the exact same thing to someone else, you'd be like, wait a minute, like, was that real? Like, are we friends, or like what's going on here? So I think none of these things in isolation will make or break a skill experience. It's just about thinking of sort of these things in harmony to just sort of find that blend of a natural sort of experience.
What would you say is a good example?
Well, hey Alexa, ask the flavor train to order some food.
We going with the usual flav?
Duh.
All aboard. The flavor train is leaving the station. One large pepperoni coming your way in a hot 30.
So what jumps out about this sample interaction right here? First of all, this user has discerning taste. They are choosing to order their food from the flavor train, so props to them. But what else? The tone of the language is fun. It's a little quirky. And having sat through hours upon hours of user testing sessions, watching people interact with skills, I've learned that this is still very novel. You know, like we're sort of used to it, but like the tiniest little blips of personality or vibe go a long way to making an experience feel special. And I think beyond that, like, what else can we see in this dialogue? Like, we going with the usual flav? Like, clearly this person has ridden the flavor train before. Good on them. And you know, the skill remembered that. And to me, this is like a very this interaction is very respectful of the user's time. Like, there's not a lot of long-winded talking in between. It's like, hey, like, welcome back. Like, we going with the usual, and it's like it's ready to go. So I think I think there's really something to be said about like seamless, efficient, and fun interaction. Like kind of finding that balance. So let's look at a counter example of the flavor train. Hey Alexa, ask the flavor train to order some food.
Today's special is our quadruple premium power pepperoni personal pan pizza. Ready to taste?
That's a mouthful.
No, I'm a vegetarian. We've talked about this, Alexa.
Sorry, I didn't get that. Should I get you a non-stop ticket to pepperoni?
So beyond the wonderful alliteration in that premium power pepperoni personal pan pizza, what else can we see there? The skill didn't remember the preferences, which is super annoying when you feel like you've established that with a skill and you're like starting from ground zero again. That's not a good way to sort of create repeat usage, obviously. But also, this skill doesn't have very robust error handling for utterances outside of the happy path. You know, if you're not familiar with that concept, I think like when you're imagining a skill experience, it's very common to just think of the most straightforward way that someone's going to go through your flow. And if you spend too much time focused on that and not thinking of kind of the inverse of that, like what's the craziest thing that someone could throw at this, you really have to build some thoughtful scaffolding to sort of create those soft landings and keep the user on track. So I think that's another thing in this example that's not particularly well done.
Yeah. So we talked about some good examples, some bad examples, some characteristics of interacting with humans, personal interaction. So what can you do in your Alexa skill to bring some of those elements into it? So 3 things. First one is memory. So keeping track of information about a customer, like in some of those examples, such as their name, they're vegetarian, as well as keeping track of session state. For example, if you're in the middle of a 6-question quiz game, you're obviously going to want to remember that. Next thing is variety. So adding variety to your speech responses, changing up your responses, makes the conversation much more engaging. And then finally, localization. So more than just simple translation, of your words into the different languages that Alexa supported in, but also units and phrases. John, did you know that 28 pounds in the U.S. is actually 2 stone in the U.K.?
Oh, really? That's very interesting.
Yes. And do you know what a sedan in the U.S. is called in the U.K.?
No.
It's a saloon.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a new one.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So quite a few interesting things. So let's dive into these a little bit. So memory. So remember, many of our skill developers use AWS Lambda to host their skill. It's a great option, but it doesn't actually have any built-in session or state management on it. So memory in Alexa is stored as JSON objects or key value pairs, and you can really store them any way you want. You can define any sort of name, value. You have quite a bit of flexibility. But we have 2 kinds of memory with Alexa. We have session attributes and persistent attributes. A session, of course, is when you first start talking to a skill, such as the flavor train, and it ends when either your skill says goodbye, thank you, or customer says stop, exit, etc. So another way you could think of that session is almost kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch. So while your customer's talking to your skill, you're building up this great image, you're storing everything, but ultimately when they stop talking, when that session closes, your Etch-a-Sketch, that's right, it's gone. So if you want to save anything, what the customer was doing, you're going to need to store that as a long-term memory or into these persistent attributes.
And there's no right or wrong way to use either of those. It's just sort of a different way of thinking about memory. And as you start to go down the path of building the experience that you're creating, you'll start to realize like some things wouldn't necessarily be important to save, and other things would be pretty crucial. So we'll get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So we'll start with session attributes. So they are passed between the Alexa service and your skill on each and every request, almost in a way kind of like we were talking about, like a kind of ping pong. Like so if yep.
I almost think badminton, because it's like even lighter. Like it's just like this little dance between the front end and the back end, passing information back and forth.
But the difference is that your skill, every skill response, you can actually add a little bit more or a lot, and if it's relevant, information back to the Alexa service. So things like maintaining a multi-turn conversation. So for example, like if I had a food recipe skill and I'm searching, I say I find the perfect recipe for eggplant parmesan, and then I want to be able to support the utterance of, what are the directions? If a customer says that, well, you're obviously going to need to know what recipe they were looking at, and so that's a great place for a session attribute. And the Alexa SDK, it does provide a number of convenience methods for accessing the session attributes and setting the session attributes. We actually included a sample here on the slide with the get and set session attributes. This is for Node.js. You don't have to use it. You still have access to the raw JSON objects, but it's definitely a convenience method that can be handy.
So I love session attributes. Big fan. They're super dope. They open up so much for you as a designer. And I think over the course of a conversation, you pick up on things from the other person, little cues and references and context, and naturally we store those things in our short-term memory as the conversation moves forward. It's sort of like our own little short-term cache in our head. And so I think session attributes are a great way to create that sense of state based on the flow of the conversation that's happening in the skill. So, if you were talking to someone and they weren't really like following along or getting it, you would naturally kind of try and express the same thing in a different way, perhaps. You wouldn't just say the exact same thing back to them. So this is a technique that I picked up from Allison Atwell, who's an amazing voice designer here on the Alexa team, and she's going to be presenting with Justin next in the design track. So definitely stick around, because they're going to have so many knowledge nuggets for you. So she introduced this idea to me of basically counting the number of times you hit an intent-specific error state within a session. So what does that mean? You're trying to do something, and the intent handler gives an error, and it reprompts the user to try again. If they try again and still fail, it would be pretty lame to just give them the same error state again. And so in the NFL skill, what we did was actually create a counter for that. And we recorded a bunch of audio with an NFL network host. And if you hit that error twice, we would fly in that audio, and he would kind of take over for a second. He'd be like, hey, it sounds like you're struggling here. And he would sort of give some very contextual advice for the specific type of thing we knew they were asking about, but wasn't quite getting it in the right way. And that was a really, really cool technique, I thought, because not only did we blend the Alexa voice with some SSML audio of a host, but like that happened in a very particular instance where someone was struggling, and it sort of reached out to grab their hand and help them through.
I thought it was cool too because you're at a point where the customer is frustrated, and you actually not only help them, but you also give them a little bit of a surprise and delight.
Totally. So it leaves you with this feeling of like, wow, like this skill is really it's listening to me, and it sort of anticipated and understood that I was struggling. Some other ways that I've used session attributes. If you are using V2 of the SDK, then you're probably familiar with the can handle object, which is super, super powerful. I think in the most basic examples, the can handle object is essentially just saying, if it's this intent, then run through this code. But you can actually pair intent parameters with session attributes to create much more nuanced filtering. I kind of like think of it as, have you ever seen like video of like probably an Amazon fulfillment center or any like crazy shipping facility, and a package is like moving down the conveyor belt, and then all of a sudden like an arm comes out of nowhere and like punches it, and it goes down like a weird chute to like the Rhode Island truck or something. Like that's sort of how the can handle object works in my mind. It's like the request payload is moving, cascading down your handlers, and if paired with session attributes, like it'll go down that path. So the Amazon.yes intent is a really good example of that, right? Because there's so many contexts in which you could say yes, but if you're not tracking what the person was doing previous to them saying yes, you wouldn't know what that yes means. So that's just one particular example, but I would encourage you to think about how you can create other session attributes that are unique to your experience and pair them with other intents in your backend, because you can start to open up some really interesting possibilities.
Yeah, cool. So those are session attributes. Let's talk about those persistent attributes again. So again, they let you store information across Alexa sessions. This data is generally stored based off of that Alexa customer ID. And this is helpful because then all of the devices that customer is logged into will be able to access that information. So I could be, say, on my Echo Show in the kitchen, interacting with the skill, and then after a few minutes, I then go to, say, a Sonos One speaker in my living room, interact with the same skill, and then maybe go upstairs to Echo Dot in the bedroom.
That house is dialed in.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Sounds like my house.
Yeah.
Things all over the place.
Yeah. And it's cool is that you can actually resume that skill, that skill interaction very, very seamlessly. So like I've done it with Jeopardy. I'll answer, say, 2 questions out of the 6 in one room, go upstairs and finish it off, or vice versa. So that's pretty cool. So to use persistent attributes, you do need to have a data store, and AWS DynamoDB is a very good option, very popular. The Alexa SDK does provide built-in functionality on how to read and write from that. We've put an example here in our slide, the get and save persistent attributes. So very handy, but you're not required to use DynamoDB. You can always use your own data store if you want. A data store, database, SQL, NoSQL, all of those are fine. You'll obviously just have to do all of your own database read and writes, but definitely recommend using that Alexa customer ID as the key for that.
If you haven't used Dynamo before, there's a number of examples on the Alexa GitHub that have that built into some of those samples. So that's certainly how I got started. I had never used a database before firing up some of those samples. One funny learning with that I wanted to share, like when you create a Dynamo instance for your skill, like the kind of standard read and write throughput is five reads and 5 writes, and there is a cost associated with that. And so I've created all sorts of sample skills, from cloning different Alexa repos that maybe I just used like for the afternoon and then like never really used again. And then one one day I realized that I was racking up like mad dynamo charges. And at first I was like, nice, like my skills are popping. And then I realized that I was just like paying for all this like dynamo capacity for just like a weird skill that I had messed around with for like 2 hours. So if you are cloning a bunch of the Alexa repos with persistence, you can go in the dynamo settings and just like lower that down to 1, and you'll certainly be within those AWS credits that you get on a monthly basis as an Alexa developer.
Well, now you can use Alexa hosted.
Oh
Do
yeah,
that in the Alexa developer console, and
totally.
you can do that for free now.
Back when I was a kid, we had to fire up our own DynamoDB.
Cool.
So what are some practical examples of persistent attributes? I think at a basic level, you can store variables like preferences. You could store, if you're working with audio player, you could store what track they were listening to and the timestamp of that, so when they come back, they could pick up where they left off. If you had a game that was bigger than a session, you would certainly want to store that progress. But there's lots of more interesting things that you can do with persistent attributes too, especially around dynamic welcome messaging. I think at the most basic level, like you'll see in a lot of skills, like the second time you come, it says like, welcome back. And that's cool, but like if you think about the possibilities around that counter of session count, coupled with persisting other things about maybe what someone was doing in their previous session, you can actually open up some really interesting possibilities around welcome back messaging. Timestamp is another one. In the NFL skill, it was really optimized for asking questions during a game. And so we looked at the timestamp of when they were last in the session. And if it was in under 4 hours, we made the assumption that it was probably game day, and they didn't need a whole welcome back spiel. It was just like, literally the welcome back message at that point was just like, hit me, like, what's up? Give me your question. So like, that's another way to do that.
Yeah, I think those are both really cool examples because they illustrate, like if you were talking to a person, first time you meet a person, you're gonna say, oh, my name is Eric, I blah, blah, blah. And then, but then the next couple times you meet them, you get to know them more. And then obviously you don't have to do your introductions, and there's a good chance that you may have an idea of what the conversation is gonna be about. You're gonna have some context. And also the NFL example is cool too, because again, you're coming back to it. You were just there. Just like if you saw your friend recently, you don't have to be like, oh, John, it's been so long.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
It's been 0.2 seconds since we last spoken to each other.
Yeah, how have you been?
Yeah,
what's new?
Yeah.
Another piece of that, beyond just the launch request welcome back message, you can also go a layer deeper and think about that at the intent level, because especially with a skill that's more advanced, that has like a lot of different areas that you can explore. And again, this is like invisible UI, right? So like you can't like explain every single thing you could do in a skill like up front. Like that would be a lot to take in. And I think
and a lot to be ignored as well.
Yeah, totally. So you can also persist like intent level counters, right? Like the first time someone hits a piece of your skill, you might want to hold their hand and give them a little more information and like let them know how that piece of your skill works. But like you don't want to do that every time. So think about places beyond the launch request where you might want to track session count, because all of that together can start to really create a more dynamic experience that really, again, like feels like, wow, like this skill is like really listening to me and like getting to know me and is like respectful of my time and like ability to like understand. Like you don't need to be explained like most of this stuff more than once, right? Like you sort of get it. So I think those are just a few examples of persistent attributes, but again, like there's no right or wrong way to use either of those. And some of these, like I hadn't even considered until that project. And I'm sure many of you are using both of those things in all sorts of other ways that we hadn't considered either.
Cool. So also with memory, or kind of a final area on memory before we move on, is that you can actually, obviously you can use some information to store some information about the user, but there's also a variety of ASK, Alexa Skills Kit APIs available that you can retrieve some of that information from the customer with their permission. So for instance, there's a customer profile API to get their name, email address, or they can share your device location or use account linking to access information from a third-party service. So for example, the time zone or location would be very useful for a skill that involved weather or say TV listings.
Totally, and that was an area that we explored a lot in that skill because we shipped in like 5 locales around the world.
For NFL.
Yeah, for NFL, and so like part of the functionality was like letting people know when and how they could watch the game, and time zones are just a crazy wormhole. Like there's nothing standard about it. Like certain places have daylight savings, like other ones don't. It can get super messy and kind of insane. So there is a really great library called moments.js that if you're doing anything with time zones, like they've done a lot of the heavy lifting around that for you. I definitely tried to do it myself before I knew that existed, and I was getting into like negative time and I was pulling my hair out, and that simplified it greatly.
Yeah. I mean, like everyone doesn't just want to be on Eastern time for everything. Like
Yeah,
even
we
in the
gotta
UK.
we gotta zoom out.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool. And so with account linking, you can also initiate transactions. Like for example, the Uber skill, you can actually request a ride. A customer can request a ride to their home or office. And so by using account linking, Uber already has stored that user's address, so much more effective than doing that, trying to get that through voice. And another thing too is if your scenario calls for it, you can also consider using the new proactive events or reminders APIs. For example, the NHL skill provides the option of getting a reminder 30 minutes before your favorite team is playing their next hockey game.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So next up is variety. This is super, super important, and I get the sense that in the Alexa and voice development community, like it's starting to be talked about and appreciated more. People hate hearing the same thing twice, and things that are out of context can sound really unnatural. And one of the things about human conversation is we naturally create so many variants of ways to express the same thing in normal conversation. That's like sort of what creates a dynamic flow of language in the world. So like, I think there's some tactics that you can definitely be using in your skills. So at the most basic level, randomizing your responses. And like I was saying, it feels like that's starting to become more and more of a best practice. And I think beyond that though, contextualizing your responses as much as possible goes a long way. And finally, tailoring your language to the user's language. So we're gonna look at a few examples of those. So here's like a basic sort of guess a number example. Is it 50?
Nope, too high. Nope, too high.
How about 25?
Not low enough.
Not low enough.
Not low enough, yeah. So both of those phrases mean the same thing, but they were most likely, pulled out randomly from an array, right? And so I think as you think about designing your skill, like think about all the places where you could create variants of that dialogue. And I would challenge you to even think more modular than the string level. Multiple segments within a single fulfillment can be randomized. And when you start to do that across your skill, there's like so many permutations that start to emerge, and it starts to feel a lot more dynamic. I think also like this is not just for the top line kind of above the water, tip of the iceberg, like primetime dialogue in your skill. It's the error states lurking in the shadows, the non-happy path dialogue that can really benefit from randomization, because that illusion of magic in your skill disappears very quickly if you hit the same error state twice. You're like, oh, okay. Like I like to think in like the Truman Show when he's like sailing, trying to like escape the bubble, and he thinks it's like limitless, and then he hits the wall, and like that illusion of the bubble comes crashing down. And one quick other pitfall with randomization, I find that like you kind of have your A material, and then in the pursuit of randomization, you start writing other ones, and then some B material starts to emerge. Like as you use your skill and you get one of the other random ones, you're like, I kind of like the other one better. So like I often go through a process where like I overwrite the strings, and then as I'm testing it, I'll sort of be my own editor. So I think that's important to do. Like it's not randomization for randomization's sake. It has to be in service of the utility of the dialogue, especially when it's navigational or trying to help the user.
Cool. So step 1, randomization. Step 2, contextualization. So if random variety is good, contextual is even better. So let's take that first example, and how can we expand upon it a little bit? Is it 50?
No, that's way off.
No.
Try
that's
something
way off.
smaller.
Try something smaller.
So, okay, fine, Alexa. All right, how about 25?
Okay, that's closer, but still
That's
too
closer,
high.
but still too high.
So you can tell a bit of a difference. I mean, it means the same thing, but it's just a little bit more intimate, a little bit more personal, for lack of a better word. So that's contextualization. So yeah, anytime you can add a little bit more detail to that specific scenario, it's just going to enhance the experience. So what's the next? Language adaptation. So another option, it's kind of interesting, is so when you're taking in say slot values or variables that you might expect that a customer might say, it can be kind of neat to repeat that value back. So rather than say, here, we'll go through this.
Here is my
Trainers.
recommended trainer for you.
Here's my recommended trainer for you.
Yeah. And so versus, you could call it a shoe, but trainer means something a little bit different. And then additionally, like if I want to say I want some sneakers, we'll go through, got some
recommendation for you.
Great sneaker recommendations. So, and so while they might mean shoe, and even in your back end, even if they actually result to the same, say perhaps same entity, it's going to be more meaningful to that customer if you repeat that back. If you were to say I've got some shoe recommendations, it seems like the customer may think, you're not really understanding me. I mean, yeah, I guess you kind of get it, but this is really what I wanted. And so on your JSON request to the skill, you'll actually have both that spoken value and the resolved entity. So you'll have the ability to retrieve this. So final topic.
So localization was our third bucket that we wanted to talk about. I think this is so important, and there's some tactics on how to achieve this, but also like some bigger picture things to be thinking about. I think first of all, don't hard code your strings. This isn't like fact skill 2017 where like all of your strings are like hard coded in your Lambda function. You really need to be thinking about decoupling those, and it will make it a lot harder for your skill to adapt to new locales. Alexa is expanding around the world so quickly. I think Brazil was the latest market several weeks back, and clearly that's only going to continue. So really think about how to architect your dialogue in a way where those things are decoupled. And there's some great libraries to sort of do that string picking for you. I18N is one. There is a startup here in Seattle called Jargon that came out of the Alexa Accelerator, and they're doing some really interesting work around kind of voice CMS and how to best architect your dialogue to support localization. So check them out too if you're not familiar. But I think beyond those tactical considerations, like language and culture is about nuance, right? Like, and even within the same language, across multiple locales, there's differences. Take Spain and Mexico, for example. They have different launch phrasing for Alexa. I didn't know that, and I tried to ship a skill in Spanish to both of those and got rejected because I didn't use the localized launch phrasing. And that's just one example, but like, I think there's so much nuance around slang and sort of just how people speak. And the pounds example that you mentioned earlier on about 14 14 pounds being a stone. So that was something that I learned about in the skill we worked on together for NFL, because you could ask about a player and get certain bio stats like height and weight. And so we were shipping to all the English locales, and we wanted to adapt those values for the markets. And in doing that, I learned about stones, and like I was like super excited that I had implemented that. I thought it was so cool, and I called over like the head of international, and I was like, check this out, like when someone talks to our skill in the UK, like it's gonna give them stones. And actually, like there's a remainder in that conversion, right? So like 160 pounds is actually like 11 stone, 6 pounds. And he was like, well, actually we round down, like we leave off the pounds. And so to me, that's a really interesting example of like, it's not just about translation, it's about localization. It's about understanding the culture of the way people speak in all of the markets that you're trying to create something for. And if you're not considering those things, it's probable that your skill might fall flat in those new markets. It might feel a little disconnected from the people that you're trying to speak to.
Yeah, absolutely. So to conclude, we recommend, these three concepts: memory, variety, and localization, to try to make your skill more of a personalized experience. And you'll notice that a lot of these concepts, very similar to how, human conversation it is. And so sometimes it can be tricky. It can involve a lot of logic, so you'll want to make sure that your development is well maintained and flexible, so that you can put in this different logic, like swapping out different strings and be able to store session context, and that you can that you can keep track of all of that. Obviously, it's all very possible, but you want to try to think about relating all this back to how you would converse with the human, and ultimately you want to try to bring that into your skill. So. One other piece is, we didn't really talk about the screen, but if a customer is using a screen, you can actually blend a lot of this into your multimodal experience as well. So you can still use memory, variety, and localization. You can use the screen to provide additional, either additional information or other visuals to enhance that screen experience. And obviously, there's a whole multimodal track here on Alexa Live that you can check out as well.
Oh yeah.
So. There are a couple other related sessions to this topic that I think there's a couple that would be kind of neat. So we mentioned the next one, how to write great dialogues for Alexa skills, where they'll go into some of the nuances of writing the dialogue to help guide the user down the right path, tell them what they're doing, as well as some good guidance on how to write great skill responses, kind of like our flavor train. Another one is for multimodal, is how do we design multimodal skills of discovery? That's a cool one. So they'll be talking a little bit about their Food Network skill and some of the thought and design processes on that. And I will say that if you use the Food Network skill around lunchtime, if you're hungry, you're going to get even more hungry, because some of those visuals are pretty awesome.
I've spun that flavor wheel.
Yeah, awesome. I recommend it. And then finally, with tools, there's the one for Build Better Skills Faster, where you'll be able to test out some of these dialogues in a quick way and see if your customers are responding to that.
So thank you so much for watching and hanging with us. To go back to where we began, like that idea of creating a magical experience, and like how the technology sort of is in service of the experience. Like I know for me, like I constantly feel overwhelmed by the speed at which the Alexa team is releasing new features and SDKs and APIs and like all these things. And like I think the best thing to do is just like look at all of those things and try to understand them and think about how they can make what you're trying to do better. It's not about using every single feature. It's about, you know, bringing new new colors to your palette in the experience that you're trying to create. So I think last thing, y'all got to complete the survey. There is a raffle, so we hear, and I'm guessing there's some super sick raffle prizes.
Wow, there's even a
So
raffle? Alexa
most
Live is amazing.
Definitely,
Don't leave us hanging on
most
those
definitely fill
surveys,
that out,
okay?
and stick around for Justin and Allison. They'll be on in just a bit.
Well, thanks.